Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be going over one more opening in E4, E5. We're going to be going over an opening called the Ponziani opening, which happens after either pawn to C3, or they can play kind of a modern version of the Ponziani with knight F3, knight C6, and then pawn to C3. So now, before we go any further, if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and please click on your notification icon. So anyways, so the Ponziani opening, it's an opening that I almost kind of skipped over in the openings that I was going to cover on how to play black against certain openings, because really when I played Scholastic chess, or even when I played through high school, back in the 90s, this opening was basically never seen. I don't even remember playing a single game when I played E5. I don't remember playing a single game against the Ponziani. It was so unbelievably rare. And of course, recently certain openings that I never ran into when I was younger seem to be popping up a lot, because I guess openings get popular because, certain YouTubers popularize them. And, I'll admit the Ponziani has got, if you know your theory, I guess, if you want to play the white pieces, there's a little bit to the Ponziani. There are a handful of grandmasters that will try it. I have a game in here we're going to look at between Nakamura and Svidler that was played in Norway in 2013. So Nakamura is clearly willing to try the Ponziani with the white pieces. But for the most part, I think at the highest levels, the Ponziani is a fairly sedate opening. It is a good opening, just for the tricks. You can potentially trick your opponent. But what we're going to be covering here today in this video is how to meet the opening with black and avoid all those tricks, and to just not even make those tricks even a possibility. So the first move we're going to look at is just the mainline straight Ponziani, like E4, E5, C3. So this should be a pretty obvious threat when somebody plays C3. They're basically threatening to play D4. So the way I look at the Ponziani, and the way you should look at the Ponziani if you want to, get the best position you possibly can with black, is it's kind of like an attempt at an improved Danish. So that's kind of the way I look at it. It's like I want to play a Danish gambit without the gambit. So they're trying to play C3 and they're trying to play D4. So our immediate reply should almost always invariably be D5. And we have this reply as well in a C3 Sicilian too. So even after E4, C5, pawn to C3, a lot of times in the C3 Sicilian, D5 is an acceptable move. The whole point is, when they play E takes D5, we're going to play Queen takes D5, and we're going to end up with this isolated queen-pawn position here when white inevitably has to take his share in the center with a move like pawn to D4. Now, unfortunately, after the move D5, there's precious few moves here where white doesn't simply just end up with a slight disadvantage, because he's going to just end up with an isolated pawn in the middle of the board. One of his few attempts at trying to turn this into something tricky and something complicated would be a move like knight to F3. And you do have to be a little prepared here, because you do have to make one or two non-obvious moves, and it is easy to fall into certain traps here. So the move you should play is, you should play d captures e4. You should actually take this pawn. And then usually white will try to be tricky either with knight takes e5 or queen to a4 check. And now this is actually a devilishly kind of tricky move, because it is kind of a natural instinct here to develop to the knight's most natural square on c6 while blocking this check. And the correct way to block this check is actually really anti-intuitive. The correct way to block this check is actually to bring this knight to d7. And the whole point is, we want to be able to capture back with our bishop, because white's next move is going to be knight takes e5. So this requires a little bit of calculation. When they play queen a4 check, you play knight d7. The next move that is coming is going to be knight takes e5. This is why we play knight takes d7. So after here, there's basically two replies. They can, of course, play queen takes e4 if they want to. This should just lead to major advantage black after knight f6, queen e2, bishop d6. Black has a ton of development here, and white's position hasn't even gotten off the ground. The other way, of course, they can play this is they can continue with knight e5. But since the knight is on d7, we can simply poke at this knight with queen e7, and after knight takes, bishop takes, we gain a tempo against the queen. They can keep trying to do stuff with bishop b5, takes, c6, and White's position is absolutely atrocious. He only has one piece developed, and we have a beautiful center pawn, and White is never going to develop his queenside in a natural way. So Black has just a beautiful position here. Basically, Black has a nearly decisive position. The computer gives this as decisive advantage Black. I'm going to be generous. I'm just going to say major advantage Black because, of course, we haven't won any material yet, but it's a huge positional advantage, big development, big center, major positional advantage here. So anyways, needless to say, no one's trying the mainline Ponziani at the top levels. They're all playing the modern Ponziani. They're playing knight f3. They're trying to get that knight to come to c6 first, and then they're playing c3. Because when you do it this way, when Black plays d5, which you should still play, because on d5, when they do play e takes d5, queen takes d5, this is a good position for Black. There is nothing wrong with this. This actually took place in Tosik versus Kabarka in Palak in 2017. There were two 2450 players, so two pretty stand-up players. Went bishop g4, bishop e2, and then we had castle's queenside. That game went bishop e3, f5, and Black, at least according to theory, Black probably has a slight advantage here, and he did go on to win in that particular game. So that's basically the theoretical line you're going to go down when they play e5, queen d5. You're going to be playing against that isolated queen pawn, very similar to how you would do in the Danish or how you would do in a Goring Gambit or something like that. So the move that everybody plays to continue to be tricky is the move queen to a4, and this move carries with it a very obvious threat. The very obvious threat is knight takes e5. Now, that very obvious threat doesn't have, for a lot of people, a very obvious way to meet it, because most of the moves here are going to cause some serious problems for Black. So really, the correct thing to do in this position is just develop. Just play knight f6 and just put pressure on e4 and d5, and if we sacrifice that pawn on e5, that's not a big deal. What these positions actually remind me of a lot is the two knights defense. In the two knights defense, oftentimes when White tries to play for like an early knight g5 and plays for a fried liver attack, Black gives White no amount of headaches by just saying he doesn't care about the d-pawn. He gives him the d-pawn and he gets all of this play. It's very similar here. White is basically conducting a beginner two-piece attack with his knight and queen, and he's saying, I can create all these problems. And I think the easiest way to solve that is to just say, okay, well, congratulations, you can use your knight and queen, and you can win a pawn, but you're going to have no development and no way to really improve your position after you've done that. So there's a couple great examples of this. So one game went bishop b5 from this position, and it continued bishop d7, e takes d5, knight takes d5, castles bishop d6, so White never did win the pawn, and obviously, after a few more moves, Black's position was solid, and this all ended up going very well. This is actually going down the road of Nepomniachtchi versus Grischuk in Amsterdam in 2019. So, like I said, grandmasters do try these positions with White, but I feel like sometimes White is at a disadvantage in a lot of these positions. So it's not like White has nothing to play for at the very highest levels in these positions. White has a solid position. White typically isn't down any material. But if things don't go right in the opening, we end up with this type of situation where we haven't really developed our queenside and Black has his fair share of the center. This position is really just clearly advantage Black. It's not a huge advantage. It's slight edge Black. That's what it is. And it was certainly enough at the 2700 level for Grischuk to pull off a win in Amsterdam in 2019. So if we go back, there were some other games in this line after knight f6. There was a notable game in knight takes e5. There was actually a few notable games. There was Savenko versus Jakovenko in Odessa in 2008, and there was also Nakamura versus Svidler in Norway in 2013. So after knight takes e5, the main idea is bishop d6. Like I said, this is just a big pawn sacrifice to just kind of dump white's development. So the knight takes c6, b takes c6. And in the Savenko game versus Jakovenko, the position actually continued after, instead of knight c6, the position actually continued e takes d5 instead. And that game continued castles, dc6, bishop e5, d4, bishop d6, bishop e3, knight to g4, knight d2, knight takes e3, d takes e3, and we ended up with a kind of a complicated mess. But this game kind of convinced me, okay, white actually does have something to play for here. This game was very complicated, and for most of the game, the computer couldn't make heads or tails of what was going on, but black did eventually come out on top in this very complicated game. He managed to get an attack. He managed to eventually just simplify the position into a king and pawn endgame, which he then won. So the other game was bishop to d6, knight takes c6, b takes c6, and then pawn to d3. Now, this game that I'm following is Nakamura versus Fiddler in Norway in 2013. And so clearly white is up a pawn, but clearly Fiddler, playing the black pieces, has an awful lot of play and an awful lot of development for this pawn. So castles, and then bishop e2, rook e8, just threatening to get that pawn back, knight d2, bishop to g4, just trying to really capitalize on that huge development lead, queen d1, undeveloping the queen, bishop takes, and then we just rip everything, and we start getting our material back with queen h4. And that's what usually happens when you have a pawn for a if you give up a pawn for a development lead, is a lot of times your development lead will lead to you getting the pawn back. Activity oftentimes is more important than material. And there is actually kind of an equation for that. Like Lasker actually broke it down. He said a pawn is worth approximately, 2 to 3 tempo, is what he said. So if you're losing 2 to 3 moves for a pawn, it's likely that the activity that your opponent is getting is worth those 2 to 3 moves, and he will eventually get that pawn back. That's why in openings like the Evans Gambit and other types of openings where gambits are played, oftentimes the correct strategy is to give that pawn back at the right moment as to regain your activity and regain your tempo. So here, black is going to be getting his material back, and he's going to be getting an advantage. So the game continued g4 and then f5, and this is kind of a cute little x-ray idea against this knight. The knight was getting double attacked, so white found a cute way to defend it, but it's not going to save the day or anything. So black continued improving his position. And Nakamura, to his credit, he managed to hang on. He's got enough threats here to where black is kind of hard-pressed to come up with anything better than just to play rook e3 in this position. And this just leaves perpetual check. This was nothing special. But, again, that's maybe just kind of the expected result. At the highest levels, I would say that white is in the mainline Modern Ponziani, white is just kind of sacrificing a lot of development to win one pawn in a really blatant fashion. And I say you just go ahead and give him that pawn, and you take your activity, and I would say that the position is either just complete equality or possibly even slight edge black. And that's basically how you handle the Modern Ponziani. When people play queen a4 against you, it's really critical. Just remember, just give them this pawn on e5. Just play the move knight f6. This is what all of the big guys play. This is what the 2700 plus crowd is playing against this move. This is more than likely the correct way to go. Give up this material, and you should have plenty of compensation for the pawn. Enough compensation at least for equality, possibly even slight edge black. Anyways, that is how you meet the Ponziani and the Modern Ponziani. I hope that you found this video helpful, and I hope you learned something new about chess. Thank you very much for watching.